In the following episode, we discuss suicide and suicide ideation. For those who are especially struggling with mental illness and depression, help is available through various resources. If you're in Canada or the US, you can dial 988. If you're in the UK, you can dial 116 123. In Australia, you can dial 13 11 14. And if you're in Iran, you can dial 115. Your mental health matters, and you are not alone.
You're listening to Cinema Rex. It is an Iranian film podcast. Episode 18, Abbas Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry.
I had seen by that time, over a period of a couple of years, 4 or 5 of his pictures. Starting, the trilogy, the olive trees, all of that. Simplicity, we talk about simplicity with Kiarostami, of course, of us. Purity being the key, but it's not easy. Many of Abbas's features are complex. Taste of Cherry is very complex, and Certified Copy, which is a beauty, is certainly complex. But they're there to be peeled away to get to the essential core at the center. And when I see Kiarostami's films, when I see the olive trees, and I see ABC Africa, Where is the Home of My Friend, or the Wind Will Carry Us, or any of these pictures, the last section of 5, the 5th episode, I think. I found that purity again. I found that I wanted to spend the time with the people in these films. It was like a cleansing to spend time with the spirit of those films, those worlds, the spirit of the artistry, which makes me see people in the world in a new, refreshing, and hopeful way.
You know what's really funny, Farn?
What?
There was a fact I wanted to look up for today's episode, and I couldn't remember where it was from. But I knew which episode we had mentioned it in, so I pulled up a previous episode to find the fact so that I could include this episode. And then I just kept listening to the rest of the show for a long time, and I was listening to what we were saying. I was like, damn, this is a good podcast. I'm a big fan of our show.
Was the source Jonathan Rosenbaum, by the way?
No, it was an interview with Kiarostami about what he considers the Coker trilogy.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Durud bar shoma dostan aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we discuss all things Iranian film and television and media and writing and art and poetry and cherries. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I am Farhan Moradi.
I'm worried this is going to be a longer episode because there's so much to cover about this important film. So why don't you dive in and first tell us who our special important guest is today?
Sure, yeah. Our special important guest is Alex Eskandarkhah.
Alex Eskandarkhah. Is a Rosie Award-nominated Iranian-Canadian director, producer, writer, entrepreneur, actor, and co-founder of the Collective for Black Iranians. His work as a director and producer with the Collective and a producer of over 100 episodes of The Gifted Gab led to directing and producing his award-winning broadcast hour documentary, Coaching While Black, which premiered at the Calgary International Film Festival and Real World Film Festival and Summit. Alex's Afro-Iranian heritage and upbringing in inner-city Toronto informs his storytelling approach as a writer, director, and creator across all mediums. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. I'm a big fan of the show. You guys are doing great things. Cinema Rex. Shout out to you too.
You're doing great things.
I'll stop.
You're doing great things.
There's a link between the name of our podcast and your family.
Yeah, indirect link. My mom's from Abadan, so she was around for when the Cinema Rex fire took place, unfortunately. She had some friends and classmates that had actually passed away in that tragedy.
Wow. Oh my God.
Kind of crazy. Our ties with cinema, hey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can't escape it. It's in our blood.
Absolutely.
Alex said something a couple of days ago. You mentioned that for a lot of people, cinema is just another form of art. But for Iran, especially with the Cinema Rex terrorist attack, there's like a tragedy that bonds everybody to film.
Absolutely.
In Iran, right?
Absolutely. A historical event that kind of, you could kind of say dictated maybe the last 40 years of our country's history, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's really, really crucial. But that's why history is important.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to ask you about the Collective for Black Iranians. You're the co-founder?
Yeah. Me and Pris. And then there was 4 other co-founders as well. Yeah, it was a labor of love. Yeah.
What was the impetus behind starting it?
2020 was a very interesting year looking back on it. We found that a lot of discourse about, obviously the Black race relations in America was happening within the Iranian community. But it was happening as if Black people weren't in that in that conversation and weren't in the community at all. You know, it was like happening while omitting Black people, even though Black people have been part of the fabric of what it means to be Iranian for millennia. You know, we've been here. It was just kind of odd that, you know, all these solidarity campaigns and all these discussions were taking place, omitting that Black perspective. You know, it's like you're having conversations about Black people. Where are the Black people, you know? And so Chris was the one who came and said, you know, we got to be the voice in this space, right? Can't have other people speaking on these issues. And so within that chaos, you know, the collective was born. And in the beginning, you know, it was really just about having those conversations about that existence, that presence. But then really, really quickly, we saw there was a need to actually educate the community, because I find that a lot of Iranians don't even know that there's Black people out here. I mean, the odd person that goes knows, but for the most part, yeah. So, and then I think in a lot of ways we've been able to change that discourse about what it means to be Iranian. You know, it's an all-encompassing thing. You know, the cultural fabric of being Iranian consists of so many ethnicities, so many other nations, so many empires, and it's all encompassing. So we just wanted to include ourselves into that conversation, and we did that with the collective through storytelling, film productions, art, you know, the whole nine. So
I find it fascinating that the countless amount of Iranian films I've seen, you don't see any Black Iranian representation in Iranian cinema, like at all. I can't think of any examples. You might know better than I do, but even when we'll talk about Taste the Cherry, there's a moment where like an Afghan seminary enters the car. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, there's like a huge tribe of Afghan citizens that look distinctly Asian.
East Asian,
yeah, because of the Mongol history. And you have the East Asian representation in a lot of Kiarostami films, but like you never see Black Iranians on screen.
Not only that, but a lot of times when we do see Iranians in cinema, a lot of the Iranian cinema for probably like a 20-year period, especially during the height of Kiarostami, the Iranians that we were seeing were all from the north. And they were like light skin, blue eyes, green eyes. And he was specifically finding people who had blue eyes and green eyes and like blonde hair and brown hair, which is in Iran, but it's like, it's still not that common in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, being in Iran, I never really seen too many people, blue eyes, green eyes, but I saw hella Black people.
Yeah.
Like, it really just depends where you are in the country, because majority of Iranians don't travel like domestically in Iran. And then most of the Black people, like where my mom's family comes from, is all concentrated in the South. People don't go there anymore. Maybe before the war, you know, the South was a place to be. But after that, you know, Darun should, like, they never really reinvested into building those communities back up. So is it excusable? I don't know. But I mean, I don't really blame people for their ignorance, because they just don't know sometimes, you know, and that's why we're here trying to have those conversations, fill in those gaps. And like you said, even in cinema, not really seeing it, you know, so there's an appetite for it. There's a space for us to come and educate and shed light on those stories, on those perspectives. And, you know, we'll see one story at a time.
So more information about the Collective for Black Iranians could be found on collectiveforblackiranians.org. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
.org.
Yes.
And the Instagram page, Collective for Black Iranians.
Yep.
It's a really fascinating and informative follow. One of the things that your main Instagram page leads to is an article about a call to end blackface performances in Iranian community, specifically drawing about Haji Firuz, which is really, really interesting, because ever since, you know, you get to a certain age where you're a little bit more woke, for a lack of a better term, you suddenly realize like, man, that's pretty
fucked up. Yeah. So he was a servant. He was a minstrel, I think is the right word, right? But he was a real person. He was an actual person. He was a slave, unfortunately, which is a dark history in Iran's long history. Right now, actually, this month, our resident historian, Dr. Bita Bakhulizadeh, she released her book, The Color Black, which I had the privilege to read, and it's about erasure and enslavement in Iran.
Oh, wow.
And how Black people ended up in the mix. One story of how Black people ended up in the mix, because there was forced migration, chosen migration, you know. But it does talk about the origins of Haji Firuz and who he was, and it's dark, man. It's dark, and it's like, sometimes I feel like we try to do this mental gymnastics about trying to justify these traditions instead of just saying, like, what is the origin? Where does it actually come from? It can be jarring. It could be a little shocking. It's kind of tough to wrap your head around, but it is something that, you know, I don't even think you have to be Iranian to look at blackface and say this is wrong. I don't think you have to be black to look at it and say this is wrong. And it's done around the world still, but I think they did ban it in Tehran after our call to action.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this was a few years back.
Oh.
And there's always been a lot of pushback from the Iranian community about it. But I mean, if black people are telling you something is harmful, I think just take their word for it,
Yeah. Pivoting from, that discussion, I'm curious about The Gifted Gab. It's a podcast you are a co-founder and co-producer of.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What's the main flagship central theme around that podcast? Why don't you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, well, it was one of my first forays into production. It was really, for me, it was about sitting across as many creators and people doing dope things as possible, just to kind of learn. I'm obsessed with processes. I think that's why I love film so much. The process of getting from A to Z or becoming a master in your craft. And so we had started with 1K combos, and me and Andre would do a lot of podcasts together. And it was our way of just having that discourse of figuring out what it takes to be great.
And then, of course, your award-winning documentary, Coaching While Black.
That was a passion project. In a lot of ways, it was my story of how I ended up in Alberta, basketball and things of that nature. It was the most challenging thing I've had to do in my life at that time. Learned a lot. I also learned that, this film thing is probably for me.
Yeah.
Through that, it's interesting because I was actually the subject of the film, Don Phillips. I was vetting him for a podcast episode. That was actually my initial intention. And the more and more I researched and the more and more I was, digging into this rabbit hole of what had got him let go from his job at Nate, I was like, man, this is kind of like a 30 for 30. And maybe it's because I had just finished watching The Last Dance. But I just saw a really cool story. And I was determined to tell it one way or another. I just didn't know in what capacity. It ended up being a documentary film, which we went and we raised some financings and then shot some footage, shot some interviews. I think we ended up interviewing about 13 people. And then, and then we premiered it at SIF. Actually, we premiered it on our own first in Edmonton at the Metro Cinema. We did a whole campaign, sold tickets, did the whole 9. And then we sent it on the festival circuit, which is still on. It's fun. It was a fun project. It was definitely a fun project.
So what I want to know is, from as far as I understand this, unless Farn confused me, it was your suggestion to do Taste of Cherry, right? We were like, Alex, we want you for the podcast. And you were like, yes, and Taste of Cherry. Yeah. So now that I've spoiled it, why don't you introduce the film we're doing and tell me a little bit about why this particular film?
We're going to be doing Taste of Cherry today. I think it is. If you guys didn't know.
Hamegiras.
Beautiful film about, I rewatched this film in a very, very important time in my life. And I have a very, very interesting connection to it. I think it's a film about mortality, right? I think it's a film about shame. It's a film about life and death. And it's such a vulnerable look at masculinity. From a perspective, I don't think we really have ever, even now, look on this side of the world, we've never really explored suicide like that. I've never seen it explored like that. We've always seen films that are maybe after the fact or leading up to the fact. But what is the psyche of someone that's ready to kill himself? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? That has decided, I think it's a very interesting place to be as a man. And I think it's a very interesting film. I wonder a lot about where Kiarostami was at when he made this film. I do think it's just a must watch and so philosophical and just artistic. And I'm a big fan of Kiarostami. It was either this or Close Up.
I'm going to start with a plot summary.
Okay.
As is tradition. Taste of Cherry. A middle-aged Iranian man, Mr. Badi, drives his car in the outskirts of Tehran in search of someone who will aid him with a mysterious task. But it isn't until the first person gets into his car, a young Kurdish soldier, when we realize the morbid element of his request. He is planning to commit suicide with sleeping pills in an open grave near a cherry tree and wants someone who will fill the grave the following day upon his death so that he can be properly buried according to his traditions. The first soldier declines, as does his next passenger, an Afghan seminarian. Finally, he finds an old Turkish taxidermist who has a sick son and is begrudgingly willing to take on the task as he is in need of the money. The men talk about the value of life, and Badi is left with doubts about whether to go ahead with the task. The film ends with Badi lying in the grave, looking at the sky as we break the fourth wall. We see scenes from the making of the film, Abbas Kiarostami directing the extras and crew on set. It has an 83% Rotten Tomato score and an 83% audience score. So Alex, I'll start with you. What do you think of Taste of Cherry?
I just think it's a powerful, powerful film. It's so beautifully just... And when I first watched the film, I was speechless. I didn't really know what to say
Mhm.
about what I just watched, about what just transpired.
Yeah.
And then the end of the film where they are showing the behind the scenes footage, I was a little bit confused at first, the first time around. I didn't understand. After kind of reflecting on it, watching it several other times, I was just blown away by its simplicity.
Yeah.
I think this film is a very, very, very simple film, but at the same time so complex in the way it's shot. It's signature Kiarostami. It's got his fingerprints all over it.
Yeah.
It's such a departure from what he'd done previous to that. Everything leading up to that was more focused on children and that innocence of a child's existence in school system, homework, principles, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, it was a departure, but it just felt so organic for him.
Yeah.
I think for men, I think this is a very, very relatable story in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
just being fed up. The film kind of speaks for itself, I think.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Faran?
I really liked it. Actually, I'm gonna quickly get to Kava's opening shot corner scene.
Go for it.
When the movie opens, we're watching him. It's a profile shot of him in the car, and he's driving along, and people keep running up to his car being like, do you need a worker? Do you need a worker? Do you need a worker? Do you need a laborer? Do you need a laborer? And he says no to everybody, and he keeps going until he comes across the first guy, and the first guy's super weirded out by him and basically runs away. And then he calls him back and he's like, listen, leave me alone or I'm going to punch you in the face. It's like, all right, I'm sorry. And then he leaves him. It's interesting that each person that he talks to, the perspective shifts more and more, right? Where at first, people are so disconnected that they are running from him or threatening him before they even get in the car. Then the next person is getting in the car, but mid conversation, it's the soldier. He gets really weirded out and he gets out of the car and runs away. And each person, little by little by little, they kind of get more and more understanding of who he is, which I think is an interesting way to delve into this guy's situation, because as an audience, it gives us an opportunity to learn little by little by little what is going on, kind of unraveling more and more perspective from his situation. I also really like that the movie explores different ethnic groups within Iran. There's the Lori guy at first. There's the Kurdish guy next.
And the Afghans.
Yeah, there's a couple different Afghans. And even the Afghans that it shows are very different Afghans. Then there's someone that we don't know where they're from. And then the last guy.
The old man?
Yeah, the old
Yes.
man.
I mean, everything I'd read about it, people have attributed him to being Turkish.
I think maybe Turk. Maybe.
Multiple books described him as a...
But he's likely Azeri because he says he's from the Azeri part of Iran. But then the other thing that makes me think he might not be is that he tells the Turk joke.
He might be Turk. I think he's Turk.
Yeah.
I don't know. I could. That's one thing.
Azeri Turk.
Yeah, Azeri Turk. Yeah.
You know why that first guy threatens to punch him, right, Faran?
Why?
Because he thinks the guy's looking for homosexual prostitution.
Oh, is that why?
The sense is that people are he's rolling up to people, rolling down the window and saying I need your help. I need your hands. I don't need any, and it's just the way he's saying things, that one guy who takes offense to it is keep driving or I'm going to beat the shit out of you. It's essentially this guy's John looking for male companionship.
I think it could come off as that. I think it can come off as that. Honestly, when I see that scene where he threatens to hit him, I just think about my mom, because that's something my mom would say to me, but
What do you say? Dahan mahan to service you
yeah.
It's not even I'm gonna beat you up. It's what's the word?
It was a very, very solid threat. It was one of those threats that you're okay, maybe I'm gonna shut up now. There's a lot of that, I feel because I feel what I got from the film was Agha Abadi is suicidal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his psyche is juxtaposed with other men's psyche who are in other completely different situations, because obviously Iran is in a state of turmoil. There's no women in the film, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing him relative to other men, right?
Mm-hmm.
And each man relative to him, they're all different ages, they're all different situations,
Different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question? Why do you think it's called Taste of Cherry and not Taste of Mulberry?
The line of dialogue he says after that is, he says the whole mulberry metaphor, which probably would have been a better title for this. But he does say to him, the old man says, "Are you sure you don't want to live another day? You don't want to have the taste of cherry in your mouth?"
Yeah,
so
he does say
the
that.
old man does say "taste of cherry" to him later.
Oh, he
on.
does? Does he
does.
say
Yeah.
it in Farsi or is that the subtitle?
No, he says Gilas.
Oh, he does?
He says
Okay,
Gilas.
okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And he's also buried. He's trying to bury himself under a cherry tree.
Cherry tree.
There's the three people too. I think was really interesting. The Kurdish soldier. They talk about duty and the importance of doing your job and duty.
Mm-hmm.
The Afghan seminary student. They talk about spirituality and Quran and God's will. The last guy is really interesting because he's a taxidermist. He's an old man, but he also works as at the Natural History Museum. So this guy's always focused on the past. Taxidermy is like bringing, these animals to life.
Mm-hmm.
You're working with dead animals, but he's also working at the History Museum specifically. Like this old man has got so much sage advice about looking back upon your life.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like each one of these guys has a very distinct POV
And
that
nature.
He
like he keeps making these visual references to mulberry trees, the taste of the mulberry, the sun hitting the leaves, the natural spring water, and washing your face with it, drinking from it. Like he's constantly making references to nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's my dog. That old man right there. That's my guy.
This is a film that people have to go into cold. Like the less you know about Taste the Cherry going in, the more it's just a kind of more of an experience rather than a film.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If you see a trailer and know what it's about, I think it's crucial not to know that he's attempting to commit suicide. So, by the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't watched the film yet, just turn off the podcast.
Well, they already know now. At this point,
We've
they
already
know.
spoiled it.
Should put a spoiler alert. It's one of those slow burns. Yeah, that like that kind of like as the plot goes on, it slowly reveals itself. And I like when movies do that, where you need to be cold to watch it, because you don't know what you're gonna get. And even like when like I don't know if you guys have done your research, like the IMDb profile and like the log line, and like it's so absurd. The concept of the film is actually super absurd and kind of meta in a lot of ways. But it's like a man drives around town looking for someone to bury him after he commits suicide. Like it's like imagine trying to get that funded.
Yeah. Well, especially because like in order to tell someone what the movie's about, you kind of have to spoil what the movie's about.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because if you don't give that away, you're like, it's about a guy driving around trying to find someone to do some job for him. You're like, what's the job?
Yeah.
It's like, you'll find out. It's like, what do you mean?
You'll find out. It's just a job. More like burying a body, something along those lines. I'm not killing anybody though.
He's essentially asking these strangers to like share a secret with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm going to be dying and I want you to do this. And I know it's going to make you uncomfortable. And you'll be the only person to know that you did this for me. I'm going to pay you a lot of money. And people are turning this down because it's like, against spiritual law and it's against legal law. But it's also like,
he's super sketchy.
I don't want to be burdened with that guilt. Like these people are like, I don't want to have this live with me for the rest of my life that I did this for you.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing to ask. But essentially he's going up to strangers asking like, I'm going to pay you money to be in this like awful secret with me for the rest of your life.
Yeah, just going back to the way that he hires people, later on, like they get uncomfortable because they're like, I don't want to be an accessory to your suicide. But the first few people, when he's first bringing it up to them, he had such a like weird and cryptic way of doing it that everybody feels super uncomfortable with him. Are we gonna like kill someone? Like, what is going on? Mm-hmm. It was frustrating me watching him try to explain it to people like this. And he'd be like, yeah, let's just go for a drive. And then he'd take them for a drive. And then he'd be like, yeah, come here. I just want to show you this thing. All right, get out of the car. Yeah. Just walk like 5 steps over there. Okay, you see that hole? They're like, yeah. They're like, yeah. So come back here at 6 a.m. and I'm gonna be lying in there and I'll either be dead or asleep. They're like, what?
What?
And like, just imagine some random guy offers you a ride to work. Okay, and then is like, oh, you don't have to be at work for another hour? Let's go for a drive. Let's look around. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, get out of the car. Go look at that grave. Like,
yeah.
I would expect him to like put a bullet in my head and then I would drop into that grave.
And the way he was asking for it was just so amu of him. Like, Benja, you can't, like, maybe a sack one, let's go for a walk. Let's do this. Like he was really beating around the bush so much. Because it's also just a weird thing to ask somebody. Like, yeah, could you just bury me alive? Like, just make sure I'm dead. But like I might be alive,
Yeah.
Like just come back and check, like make sure I'm like not breathing. But if I am breathing, like just say my name.
Yeah,
and
call
then
my name a few times.
Call my name a couple times. Maybe throw a rock.
Yeah.
just to see if I budge. I just found a way, I like, as good as the movie is, I do in a lot of ways. It's got a lot of theater to it. I think he's a very dramatic man.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think he's wants a little bit of attention.
Yeah.
But I think he's just desperate, I think he's lost in the sauce, and he doesn't know what he wants to do, and he thinks this might be his best bet. But
I think as much as he doesn't want to admit it, I think he's looking for someone to convince him to not do it.
I think that's exactly what he was looking for. Yeah.
It's interesting that when they get to the construction worker, they discuss the location of Imam Ali's tomb. Remember that scene?
Mhm.
And they point out that there's competing claims to where the tomb really is. And there's something interesting about them they're discussing that, the tomb is buried here, the tomb is buried there. It's like if Batty dies in a hole he's dug for himself, covered by 20 spadefuls of dirt. He wants to pay someone to shovel the dirt over him, but no one's gonna. It's kind of like very similar. There's some parallel stuff about this, like Imam Ali's tomb, not knowing where it is, versus his tomb would be somewhere that only one person would know where it is.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I thought that, like, there's a lot of situations like that where the film is nuanced in those ways that are shedding light on some of the discourses and debates and a lot of the social issues in Iranian society too.
Yeah.
I think this film does a great job of kind of painting a very nuanced picture of what life looks like in Iran for men. It's like
Yeah.
the different men that we see, they have different social statuses, different backgrounds, different situations, different ethnicities, right? And I think that Agha Badi's interactions with these people is painting this picture of Iranian society as we haven't really seen on screen prior to that, because it came out like 97. What are the films coming out of Iran like prior to that? I don't remember seeing. Well, I wasn't alive. I was alive, but I wasn't really watching films consciously. But things that I have watched didn't really depict all these different ethnicities, let alone actually discuss. There's a line he says to the Kurdish soldier, is like, something about, you guys have been at war, you know how to handle a gun or something like that. I think those little nuanced tidbits, really, really shed light on what each of these respective men and the communities they come from are dealing with when it comes to, living in Iranian borders.
Yeah. I also wonder if he's trying to bring a little bit of like levity to the scenes. One note I made was someone offers, he's like, come to my place, like I'm working, I'm gonna make you an omelet. I'll make you an egg omelet. And the guy says like, no, thank you, eggs aren't good for me.
Yeah, I made a note of
chuckled at that point because I'm like, the guy's like planning on killing himself, so why does he care whether or not eggs are good for him? He's planning on being dead in like 6 hours. And I'm like, is that supposed to be as funny as I just found that line? I can't tell.
There's some stuff that I found hilarious in this film.
Yeah.
I was so upset with the way that he treated that guy, the guy who offered him the omelets.
Yeah, the Afghan.
Because he was like, wait, what is this job? Finally, he explains, and he tries to guilt him into burying him. He's like, look, you're a spiritual man. You're a good Muslim. Like, this is the right thing to do. Like, do this favor for me, whatever. And then he's like, well, no, like, because I'm Muslim and like, because of my spirituality and my beliefs, like, I don't know if I can be complicit in this, all this stuff. And then he's like, look, I don't want to lecture, especially from some uneducated man like you. Like, he goes off on this poor guy. He's like dragged him from his place of work, taken him up a hill, like made him do all this sketchy stuff and get out of his car and go look at a grave. And then when the guy feels kind of uncomfortable because he's put him on a spot and brought up his spirituality, he like loses it at this guy. Old man driving around telling everybody what they can and can't do.
It's his death, man. They're just invited.
Yeah. The master stroke of this is also never explaining what brought him to the brink of suicide.
Yeah.
Like, you get no backstory on this guy.
Yeah.
None.
It's like Kiarostami is just like, I'm not interested in why. I'm just interested in what next, or
Yeah.
you can let your audience stay in mystery for a long time, and as long as you're engaging with what's happening and your audience wants to know what's going to happen next, it's fine. And we never get that information. And for me personally, and I feel like you guys agree with nodding your heads, you don't need to know why. Like, why would that?
Yeah. Well, I've always heard, like, when it comes to screenwriting and storytelling, you want to assume that your audience is smart.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you don't want to assume that they're dumb, because if you assume that they're dumb and they need everything explained to them, then everything becomes too on the nose. You leave too many things.
Yeah.
He keeps us engaged because we want to know why, but we never get to know why. And we don't even know that he's committing suicide. So it's like, it's an onion, you know, there's so many layers. And like, as the film goes on, just one by one, we peel it back. Nothing makes us cry.
Tamit Piaz. Taste of onion. Yeah. But there's a question I have for both of you is, after he talks to the old man at the end, near the end, you see him kind of walking through the streets of Tehran, and he sits on a bench near the sunset when the sun is setting, and he's watching like cranes building back or building up Tehran. Like there's like construction cranes building up buildings against the, you know, the sunset casting down. I was just wondering, do you guys have takeaways on what that was? Because I thought it was interesting. So much machinery. The film starts with a lot of construction sites and then becomes more grassy and trees like throughout the film as it goes on. It becomes more nature. Because I didn't.
The machinery I thought the machinery was like foreshadowing, you know, because he was looking to get buried.
Yeah, exactly.
So the shots of the dump truck dumping all the dirt, you know, I thought that was just brilliant foreshadowing, and also misdirection, because, you know, he doesn't end up actually going through with it. I think that shot of him watching the sunset was where Fikrish Avas should. Yeah. You know, like when the old man was telling him, like, change your thinking. You know, like, you don't want to see the sunset one more time. Like, he was asking him these kind of questions, and then in that scene, he got the chance to actually sit down and take in that image, which is a beautiful image, you know, of Iran. It's a beautiful image.
I think for me, there's two different readings of it, and they're like pretty much opposite readings. One of them was that he can look at that and be like, oh, well, life goes on. Like, this isn't the end. Life goes on. And maybe that's a little more hopeful. But then another reading was the old man, when he was talking about what convinced him to not do it, right? When he talks about he drove off to a mulberry tree with a noose, and he kept trying to throw it over the branch and get it hooked. And no matter what he did, he couldn't get it to latch onto the branch. And then finally a mulberry fell into his hand and he ate it. And it was just so sweet. And then another one fell and he ate it, and he just started eating more and more of them. And then the kids came and joined him, and he saw the sunlight and all this stuff. So he's talking about the natural beauty, right? But then Mr. Badi'i, he doesn't necessarily have that. Like, he gets the sunset, but he's seeing this like artificial backdrop. He's seeing construction, right? And then he doesn't see the sun. He sees it get dark. He sees the moon. He hears thunder and howling. He doesn't hear the laughter of the children. And he's there contemplating this for what feels like the entire night. And I think that it's meant to be terrifying and to build that tension where it's like, oh shoot, this guy doesn't have all those things that Mr. Bagheri had, the old man. So is he going to go through with it? And so for me, it actually built so much tension in that scene. It's like a few minutes of just like silence and just B-roll of nighttime. And it's terrifying. And I think that it was brilliant.
There's also a funny scene, just to upend all that beauty with a funny scene of when he drives the car. Did you notice that he almost bumps into a guy and someone honks their horn? He's like, "What's the matter with you? Are you in a hurry to die?"
Oh, I missed that.
The guy drives off, and I thought it was really funny.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Funny. Should we go to behind the scenes and trivia?
Yeah.
So this is the film that really flung Kiarostami into international prominence, as it was the first Iranian film ever to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival. It shared the prize with The Eel, a film by Shohei Imamura. Abbas Kiarostami shot each of his actors separately, with him sitting in the other seat. So he's either in the driver's seat shooting the passenger, or in the passenger seat shooting the driver. He would instigate conversations with his non-professional actors and film their responses, meaning that no two characters were ever in the car at the same time.
Like, there's scenes where he has like in the lookout tower and the museum and all that. Those are obviously separate from the fact.
Okay, so the final scene, you know how it looks all like weird footage, right? There was actually a properly shot version of that scene, even though it's breaking the fourth wall. But the footage, the final scene, got destroyed in the lab accidentally. So he ended up using the B-roll that they were shooting. He wanted to break the fourth wall where he had them all like come out and the camera crews there, but it was properly shot, high quality. So when he found out that the lab had accidentally destroyed the scene, he considered reshooting the scene properly. But then he looked at the B-roll and the off-focus colors and all the weird, and thought, you know what, this actually is better for what I'm trying to affect. and he decided to go with the B-roll of the footage.
Whoa.
And we'll discuss that in deeper analysis because it was an accident that footage got lost.
That's wild. I didn't know that.
The film's original title was Journey to the Dawn.
Okay, you know what's funny? You mentioning that? When I was watching the movie, I was like, I feel like a better title for this would be like The Long Night.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Just because, especially when you get to that scene where he's like sitting through the nighttime and it's like terrifying. It's just such a build up to that. So like Journey to the Dawn is also like pretty solid.
I like that name.
By the end of 1999, Taste of Cherry had generated a respectable $340,658 in its U.S. distribution, playing at 147 art house and university cinemas and commercial cinemas across the country, far exceeding the production cost of less than $200,000, which was the average film budget an Iranian film got at the time. So it's considered like a financial success. The film does not include a background score at all, except for the ending titles. This features a trumpet piece by Louis Armstrong, 1929 adaptation of St. Mary's Infirmary Blues.
Yeah.
There's diegetic songs, yeah.
Abbas Kiarostami considers Taste of Cherry a more appropriate third movie, along with Through the Olive Trees and Life Goes On, since he says that these three films are more connected by the theme, the preciousness of life, stating that the Coker trilogy, as it's known, is only connected through the accident of place. His later films, mostly starting with Taste of Cherry, were, as Hamid Nafisi puts it, widely ignored by the Iranian government, who thought his name was too popular to outright ban, and that doing so would have made his movies a cause célèbre against him. So they just flat out ignored him and didn't allow his films to be shown in the country, but they didn't speak out against him. So starting with Taste of Cherry, this was the beginning of the government being like, we're not going to show your films anymore in
Wow.
this country. But we're not outright banning you. Because of this, theaters would release bootleg screenings of Taste of Cherry. The culture of piracy was so strong and brazen that in 1997, Kiarostami was invited to speak at a packed public screening of a bootleg copy of Taste of Cherry, which had not yet received an official exhibition permit inside Iran. He refused to attend it and requested the students organizing the event to desist from such practices.
That's so funny.
That's crazy.
Kiarostami often made short sketch films while conceptualizing his features. For Taste of Cherry, he did a 45-minute test film called Project. It's also known as Sketch, in which Kiarostami, along with his son Bahman, act out some of the parts of the film, and they're interviewing strangers on the road, asking him to be willing to bury a friend. In that version of it, the guy who wanted to commit suicide was dying of cancer. So, like, that's a really interesting, like, if you consider a rough draft of this movie, is this like a sketchy version of the film? There was, like, cancer was the reason for their friend who wanted to be buried. And you could actually see this footage in the Criterion Channel or the Criterion Edition. It's called Sketch or Project.
I love how his sizzle for this movie was like a whole other movie.
And it was actually technically, that was directed by Bahman, Kiarostami. That was directed by his son.
In an interview with IndieWire, Kiarostami is asked about the script, and the guy kind of assumes that it's improvised, and Kiarostami says, no, I write every scene, I write all my dialogue, but in the moment, if I need to, I will make changes. There's this, like, I think a mythos around Kiarostami going to a scene with no script and like they just figure it out as they go. But every interview I've ever seen with him, he always mentions that he has a script, and he takes it as a compliment when people think that he doesn't. To that point, the soldier character, when he picks him up, he kept breaking character. The soldier, the guy kept thinking that they weren't shooting yet. He was like off guard. He was very casual, and he's like, oh yeah, so when are we gonna shoot the movie? And he's like, we're shooting the movie right now. And he's like, oh, okay. And then they go through a couple lines, and he's like, yeah, but like, when is the movie actually happening? He's like, right now. Because he's like, and he talks about it in the interview, he's like, this guy was expecting us to like, you know, give him a gun, and he was gonna have an action scene, and he was gonna shoot someone and whatever. So and there's a point where he asks him to like, he wanted to just see like kind of how he would react. In the dashboard, there was a knife that the crew had used it previously to like cut open a pomegranate. And so the knife had like the red pomegranate juice on the knife. And he's like, hey, do me a favor, open up the dashboard and hand me the knife. And so he opens the dashboard and he hands it over, and he's like petrified. And that petrified look that he gives is the look that they use in the film when he gets really scared of him. It's his reaction to a paring knife that has pomegranate juice on it.
Really funny.
I love that. That's film. That's directing right there.
Yeah.
That's directing.
And then I have one more moment of BTS. It's about the ending of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, the ending of the film creates a violent reaction. My expectations were completely ripped out for me. It's a big risk. It must have been a big risk even for an Iranian film. Can you discuss the risk? And Kiarostami says, it's like you're speaking for me because I felt the exact same way. One night when I was conceiving the ending, I did think that it was a huge twist in the end. I wasn't quite comfortable with it. Then I woke up in the morning and I did think it was a really big risk, but it was a risk worth taking. Even when I have people arguing about the ending of the film, I like it because it means the movie has not ended. I don't care if it meets some people's expectations or goes against those expectations, but the fact that the film has a life in their minds and they keep thinking about it, that's what I like. It creates some energy in the mind of the viewer, and sometimes I think that kind of energy is more important than people agreeing on what they see or like what they see. And that's it for behind the scenes and trivia. Kaveh, do you want to dive into critical reaction?
2009 Time magazine ranked Taste of Cherry as one of the top 10 films in Cannes Film Festival history.
Well deserved.
Chosen by Cahiers du Cinéma as one of 10 best pictures of 1997. It was ranked number 6. I thought this was fascinating. Exiled filmmakers such as Parviz Sayed and Reza Alamizadeh complained that major international film festivals cut Iranian exiles out of festivals that showcased films made inside Iran. So these guys were complaining that these international festivals weren't showing the films of exiled Iranians. Jaber Kalimbi claimed that awarding the Golden Palm at Cannes to Taste of Cherry 97 was due to the French government's desire to curry favor with the Iranian government. Kiarostami was also criticized for this. In an article titled The Political Taste of Cherry, Kalimbi accused Kiarostami of being a perfect model of a compromise and opportunist filmmaker.
I don't agree with that, but I agree with Parviz Sayed's criticism. What are your thoughts, Alex?
I mean, I think artists constantly get caught in the crossfire of political misinterpretations and their pieces and movements and projects get co-opted by governments all the time to fit their agendas. So I'm not really surprised with that part about the French government.
But do you agree with what either of those guys are saying?
No, not at all.
You work in this industry long enough, you see that there is a lot of jealousy.
You're right.
People are human, and sometimes they'll point to a lot of things of like, I'm not successful for this and this reason. And to say that like, oh, the French are only currying the favor to films made in the Islamic Republic of Iran because they want more movies from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
But those are two different quotes. One guy said the first part and one guy said the second part. Because I do think that a lot of international cinephiles were giving preferential treatment to the movies made by Iranians in Iran. But I don't think that the reason is to curry favor with the government. That's the part I disagree with.
So what would be the reason to not allow exiled Iranian filmmakers into their festivals? The reason they won't give exiled filmmakers a chance at festivals is what? To give a middle finger to the Iranian government?
No, it's because they find the movies made by filmmakers in Iran to be more impactful. Because here's an artist making something through resistance. It's like when you see a flower bloom from concrete.
I haven't seen that film. I want to read a quote to you, and then I want to tell you guys, this is a critical review. They described A Taste of Cherry as an emperor without any clothes, excruciatingly boring, a lifeless drone. He said, I have an abundant patience with long, slow films that if it engages me. Yes, this is a humanistic feeling underlying the action. Yes, an Iranian director making a film about a forbidden subject of suicide must have courage. But is Taste of Cherry a worthwhile viewing experience? I say it is not. 1 star. Roger Ebert.
Roger could eat
it. This film is included on film critic Roger Ebert's most hated list. And I mean, he liked Iranian films. He liked a lot of Kiarostami films.
Yeah, he does.
It was a major contention between him and our man Jonathan Rosenbaum, who loves every Iranian movie. And Jonathan Rosenbaum gave this 5 stars. So this became a big back and forth between those two critics.
4 out of 4.
4 out of 4. Okay, deeper analysis. Our interpretation of the themes and subjects of the film. What is this film actually about? Let's talk about the ending. Let's start with the ending.
Let's start with that.
Because I want to do this. It's got a lot. Just quite simply, I guess I'll ask you guys. Do you think he did it or not? Do you think he committed suicide at the end of the film?
No. My initial interpretation was that he got into movies.
The character?
Yeah, that was my first, the first time watching it.
Interesting.
I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand that this was BTS. I was like, oh, maybe he became an actor or a filmmaker after this, or like some sort of, you know. That was my initial interpretation. Then after a few times of watching it, then I'm like, okay, maybe that wasn't it. But my first time watching it, it's like this guy had a revelation. You know, he watched the sunset and said, you know what, I'm going to become a filmmaker or something like that. Because I found the ending. I find, and I'm sure Kiarostami was pretty adamant on the ending being, it's up for interpretation. I think he did that on purpose and left it vague like that, so that we put our own conclusion on it. And that was initially my first conclusion.
And is that still the conclusion you have, though?
Now I think it's just, well, especially after what you said about they lost some of that footage and they just decided to use that. I'm like, okay, well, now it makes a little more sense. But I still don't think he didn't go through with it. That's my conclusion. He did not go through with the suicide.
Even with that other footage like not existing anymore, that's a different movie, right?
It is a different movie.
Based on what the movie that you just saw, with it being like, because it essentially looks like it's a VHS tape. I don't think it's, I think it's like DV cam or whatever. But for the audience, the last scene of the movie, so it's building up to this whole thing. He wants to commit suicide. It's nighttime. We're seeing his perspective throughout the night. And then all of a sudden it cuts to this VHS footage of people making a movie. And it's like the main actor, the actual director of the movie. There's a bunch of soldiers running around doing drills. And then the movie ends. My reading was a little different. For me, it was kind of like Schrodinger's cat, where it's like until that box is open, the cat is both alive and dead. Or in this case, until the sun comes up, the man is both alive and dead. And I think that that's kind of the point, is for me at least, is that, well, currently he's still alive because we never see the sunrise, right?
Yeah.
So I think that as the movie goes on, the movie never ends. And because the movie never ends, the guy never dies. And I think that that's kind of interesting. Because to me, too, there's enough evidence to argue either point. You can definitely argue, oh, well, he has this whole scene with the old man, and he does a U-turn and he goes back and he finds him at work and he's like, hey, when you come tomorrow, can you like throw a couple pebbles at me? He's like, why? He's like, just like to make sure that maybe I'm not like asleep. He's like, okay, I'll throw 3, not just 2. And he's like, okay. And maybe like, you know, shake my shoulders a little. And he's like, listen, even if I'm beheaded, I promise you, I'll come and check on you.
Yeah.
And then he's like, okay, just like, you gave me your word, right? You promise, Mr. Bagheri, like as he's leaving, like this guy's terrified, right? So these are reasons to be like, oh, this guy doesn't want to do it. He's been convinced not to do it, right? But then we still see he has this like terrifying night, and the song that plays at the end of the film,
Louis Armstrong,
St. James Infirmary. And the song tells the story of a man who visits St. James Infirmary to mourn the death of someone he loves. He describes the scene of them lying on a table surrounded by mourners and expressing his grief and disbelief at the passing. And while this song is playing, you're seeing these soldiers kind of running around and doing drills in the area where Mr. Bagheri would have buried Mr. Badii. So that's evidence to suggest that maybe he did go through with it.
Yeah, but also knowing Kiarostami, he probably doesn't even know. He just like, I like the song, so I put it on.
That's also very possible, is that
been...
he just like, because he also picked a part that didn't have lyrics. It's Louis Armstrong's trumpet solo at the beginning. But yeah, I think for me at least, the idea is that he's not dead or alive because the movie's not over. And I think part of it too is to be like, don't worry guys, at the end of the day, it's just a movie. There is no man to be dead or alive because he's just an actor.
Yeah, I have a very similar. I'm leaning more towards Alex, but I kind of agree with both of you guys. I think he didn't do it because of the stuff you're saying, Farn, about how he had that second change of heart. He's like, make sure, throw the rocks. Like you can already see like the gears changing of like, oh man, if I choose to not want to do this, like I better make sure. Like he's already having those doubts. But also the important thing is the man tells him you have to change your perspective on life. It's not about the things that life can give you, but your thinking has to change. And you know what happens shortly after that? For the first time, we get out of the car and we have the long shot of the perspective of him in the window. And he's in his apartment. Literally, the film's perspective is changing.
Yeah.
Not only then, but then he goes into the grave and it's dark. And you can interpret it being as dark, but like also you're seeing glimmer of light, moonlight in the clouds. Like light is still shining through the darkness. And then you have the legitimate, real change of perspective again to this DVD, like this VHS quality.
Mhm.
So like the perspective is changing a lot to maybe infer that his POV is changing.
Mhm.
The characters completely change their perspective, which is, I think it can be taken any way. People are like right to assume any version they interpret, but my interpretation is that ending, the fact that the perspective changes and the next day is sunny and you could hear people like working, but they're working in a fun sort of like
Mhm.
everyone's enjoying themselves. It's a sunny day. It's a film set. It's almost like the veil has been lifted. The film is over, but like here are these people, like you're saying, Farn, it's like it was just a movie all along. But I feel like all these emotional beats make you feel like I don't think he did it.
Yeah.
I don't think he went through with it.
To your point too of that the scene where he's in his house
Yeah.
and the perspective changing, I noted that too because I was like, oh, it's interesting because like we are not allowed the privilege of seeing what is going on with him
Yeah.
when he's alone.
Yeah.
We only get to see him and his POV and all this stuff as he's going around looking for people and talking to people, right?
Yeah.
We never get to see him alone with his thoughts.
Yeah, we're following him constantly in relative to other people, in relative to other things, you know. And on top of that, I also think, Kaveh, you were talking about how his perspective had changed.
Yeah.
One thing that was really interesting with the film is two things. Each conversation he has with each person is completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this was intentional or if this is just something I interpreted on my own. But I was watching the framing of each scene,
Yes.
right? Of each conversation. And each person that he's having a conversation with, the window of the car is at a different level for each person, depending on
Wow.
what they're talking about, depending on that person's kind of emotional state. Like with the soldier, he's talking about, you know, kind of their routine and stuff like that. And the window's like not quite up all the way. It's kind of like maybe like below his neck. Maybe he's anxious about being Sarabaz and stuff like that.
Mm.
In the beginning of the film, when Agha Ibadi is driving around, right? He's kind of getting frustrated as he's trying to find someone to do the job for him. And I feel like the window of the car kind of creeps up, kind of like almost, you know, when someone's like up to their neck and shit, they say.
Yeah.
And I feel
Suffocating
like,
almost.
yeah, like suffocating. And I feel like that window in the car, because everybody has it, every conversation we see
Mm-hmm.
is there. Depending on everybody's psyche and emotional state in each scene, the window's at a different place, right?
Yeah.
When he feels like he finally found someone to bury him, like the window's either all the way up or all the way down, right?
Mm.
But when he's getting frustrated, we see it kind of like up at his nose, up at his neck,
Yeah, it's interesting.
right? And it's changed. Yeah, and I don't know if it was intentional. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. And even the characters themselves, when they're like each passenger, you know, the windows at a different height for each. It's all different across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I found that was really interesting, and I think it was, I don't know, maybe he was trying to reflect each man's tolerance for shit. You know, I think when.
Yeah.
I just found that interesting, and I was that was something that kind of stuck with me. Maybe the last 2 times watching it, and I was trying to see if there was something there, and I thought I saw a little pattern with that.
I never noticed that, but I think I want to go back and check that out. That's really interesting.
Yeah, me too.
The thing I thought you were going to say about the framing was the idea that when they're showing the exterior shots of the car on the road, he does that very Kiarostami thing if he keeps showing the same parts of the road. Because the guy keeps taking everybody back to that same spot. So you keep seeing the same route.
He keeps looping
over and over
Yeah.
again. Yeah. But if you remember this, one part with the old man, at one point he's like, you know what? The old man like flips the script on him and goes, take this route instead. And he's like, it's a longer ride, but it's a smoother ride.
Much
And for the
smoother.
first time ever, Badi takes a different route. So literally changing perspective again and changing the course of action. Badi's going one way the entire time. The old man says, take this route. Not only is it smooth, it's longer, meaning longer life, but it's a smoother life.
Absolutely.
And he's like, and that's when he starts talking about the mulberries and he talks about the chase of cherry. And Badi listens to him and takes that route.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's the other thing.
And when he's listening, and that's actually another thing I was going to say, actually, is that throughout the whole film, with every other passenger, we're in the car with them, right? That's one perspective.
Yeah.
When he tells him to take that route, he starts to lecture him, right? And
he doesn't like lectures from anybody else.
he doesn't like lectures. And so when he's being lectured by him, we're outside the car the whole time.
Yeah.
And, you know, like we're not actually in there with him anymore. And I thought that was a really interesting choice. I thought maybe
we don't even see what that guy looks like until like towards the end of that conversation. We never even see him get in the car.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, I don't know, my interpretation of that was like, one, he doesn't like being lectured. So, you know, when someone's lecturing you, you try not to make eye contact, especially when they're right, you know? And I think that's what, in my interpretation, that's what that was reflecting, you know, when he flipped the script on him and one, told him to take this other route, and then two, starts lecturing him. Now he's he's almost disengaged, but he starts to come around, and like you're saying, his perspective starts to change. And even in that conversation where he's being lectured, our perspective is different. With everybody else, we're in the car with him, it's eye to eye, it's back and forth conversation. But in this part where like the dialogue is completely flipped on its head, because now he's not saying anything, he's just listening.
Yeah.
And now we're watching from far away, we're kind of disengaged, we're kind of not direct, but that perspective is starting to shift, I feel like. And then the rest of the film kind of carries on in its own way, right?
Yeah. And he goes on a completely different route. Like literally he goes on the route that the old man suggests he takes on the track. This is, I thought, a really interesting and crucial part to bring up when I was doing my research. When asked in an interview about why he turned to the subject of suicide, Kiarostami replied that he'd become interested in the matter when he read the aphorism by Romanian French philosopher Émile Cioran. And the aphorism is this: had it not been for the possibility of suicide, I would have killed myself a long time ago, which Cioran wrote in the book The Trouble with Being Born. And it's a gloomy reflection on the absurdity of life. But the thing that I think is really interesting is I did like deeper read into the Cioran quote, and he's basically like saying that Cioran began to think of suicide as a concept that he thought was much more connected to freedom than any sort of last ditch effort to end. It was sort of like it's a last ditch effort to end suffering in a moment of pain. In other words, knowing that you have the freedom to commit suicide made life worth living. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There's a big separation and distinction between the idea of suicide and the actual act. And this is critical for Cioran, which is what Kiarostami was drawn to, is suicide was something that brought him comfort, just knowing that no matter what, he isn't trapped here. Meaning that he could have never endured life if it weren't for this freedom that was available to him. This option comforted him because it was always there, so it allowed him to continue to exist however he wanted to. And so this idea, as morbid as it sounds, as like suicide being the ultimate expression of freedom, is a really interesting thing that not only ties back to the idea of like life in Iran anyways, and this like limitations that you're given on your freedom, but the fact that Kiarostami had read that quote and it touched him deeply. Almost like there's a comforting thing to think about how you do have that choice no matter how bad things get. Yeah. And that is a freeing thought. It's not a thought of enslavement. It's a thought of like, at the end of the day, you have that. And there's a comfort in that, not actually doing it, but knowing that ability is there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that because, and I think that he plants that seed in the movie. There's a scene where Mr. Badi mentions that if God didn't want us to do it, he wouldn't give us the choice to commit suicide, right? And so that guy almost sees it as like, oh, well, like, this is a valid option if I have the option, blah, 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 blah. Like, you can't tell me what to do, all this stuff, right? Yeah. But my reaction to that as I was watching the film, and this is largely because Kiarostami is like setting you down that path to have that reaction, right? But my reaction was, that's why life is so beautiful. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why it's so precious, is that at any point you could end it, right? But what makes life beautiful is the freedom to keep living, is the choice to keep living, despite these things happening. And I think going back to something you mentioned earlier, Kaveh, about not mentioning some of the criticisms that he got about him not mentioning why this guy was suicidal, I think that it's actually more important to not show it because it doesn't glorify the depression aspect of it, right? Like, it's commentary on someone, on a person, on an individual in that point in his life, but it's not glorifying the act. It's not glorifying the decision around it.
Yeah, well said, Farhan. Well said, Alex.
Thank you very much. Very much thank you.
Let's go to best scene. I want to start with you, Alex. What is your favorite scene in the movie?
My favorite scene is so hard to choose, but I would say it's the one we were just talking about where he's being lectured by Aghay Bagheri. I really love the dialogue, the discourse, and I just like the camera choices, how they change so dramatically. Farsi itself is such a beautiful language.
Yeah.
And I really think in that lecture where he's talking about the mulberries, where he's talking about, like in Farsi, we have a lot of proverbs, idioms and stuff like that. And I felt like he was just laying so many idioms on him. That little bit about the finger, that he was using as an analogy to change his thinking. Like those kind of things really, really resonate with me. And I think that's what makes Iranian film so special. And when I see that, those little small lessons and those small idioms and those proverbs and that wisdom, and just how poetic it comes off when it's coming out of someone's mouth like that, it just really, really resonates with me, and it makes me fall in love with these films all over again. So I'd say that my favorite scene is when Aghay Bagheri gets in the car with Aghay Badi, and the whole visual element of the film changes because the conversation changes. This is a very dialogue-driven film.
Yeah.
And the images, I think, are meant to supplement and amplify that discourse and, whatever that's being said. As soon as he gets in the car, I just feel like we're almost in a different film. The tone changes. It becomes like you're sitting there with your amu, or your grandfather. You know what I'm saying? And it's like it becomes like this lecture on life and why life is so precious. This guy's driving around trying to find someone to help him kill himself, and here comes this old man who's like, "Yeah, I'll do it, but I'm also gonna talk you out of it while we're here."
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that's something very humane, and I think that's what's so beautiful about our culture, right? It's like, here's a man, who's unsuspecting, doesn't need the money. It seems like he's well off, but he sees a brother in crisis, and he's like, I gotta see if I can talk this guy out of this. And that's the scene that really sits with me.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say it really quickly too. Mine's the same. I wrote best scene is the mulberry scene.
Yeah. Same scene for me.
Okay, all three of us. It's that old man, right? That guy steals it. That guy steals, the movie.
And he has a couple moments too where, like, if a man wants to help another man, he'll do something good. He'll save a life.
انسان وقتی میخواد به یه انسان کمک کنه خوبیه کمک خوب بکنه یه کار خوب بکنه یه زندگی را نجات بده آقا.
If you don't explain your problem to people, can someone really help you?
شما وقتی مطرح نمیکنین که مشکلتان چیه کسی میتونه به شما کمک کنه؟
Every problem has a solution, but if you don't talk, you'll never find it.
به هر حال هرچی هست راه حل داره ولی وقتی شما حرف نمیزنین از کی کار برمیاد برای شما آقا.
And I love that because you'll never find it. And I think going back, Alex, to your original thesis for this film about how it's about, men's mental health and the state of men, especially in Iranian culture, this sums it all up.
Absolutely.
There's so many Iranian men who just won't talk about how they feel about things. They won't talk about how they feel about the passing of their parent, the passing of their sibling, their childhood trauma. They don't talk.
Absolutely.
And if you don't talk about it, you can't get out of those problems.
Absolutely. And that's why I felt like the film, the theme became like right there. It just jumped out off the screen. It's like the pride of men, and more specifically Iranian men. Up until this point, it seems like he hasn't really told anybody why he wants to do what he's doing. And we never know. But this guy reflects and gives his experience with suicide, right? He starts talking about, I decided I was going to kill myself. I put the rope in my trunk. I thought that was really powerful because now he broken the ice and tried his best to relate to this guy so he can talk him out of it. And he used the exact same thing that this guy is looking for, someone to help him kill himself. He came with the story, and I think that's where he started to get through to him. That was definitely my favorite scene in the film. Takes a cherry.
He literally takes the wheel, right?
Exactly.
His hand isn't on the wheel, but like he's even decided, he's like, look, this whole movie, you've been the one driving, you've been the one giving people proverbs. Now I am saying where we go, and I'm going to tell you how to process this.
Sat.
Least favorite scene.
Least favorite scene.
I could go first. Mine was the scene with him going up the security post in the cement factory, just like talking to the Afghan guy there. And I felt like the film for the first time loses a bit of steam when he's up on the tower talking to that guy. We had just found out what his goal is. We're like, oh man, he wants to commit suicide. What's gonna happen next? And he just kind of just goes up in the tower and talks to the guy about like omelets and like, so he's like, you work here. And the character does this thing that every Kiarostami character does. There's like, he asks 100 questions of a guy.
Yeah.
Hey, what are you doing here? You work here? How long have you been working here? What time did you start? You work here alone? What time? Who worked there? You know, like those questions. Those characters always ask a million questions. I'm like, oh my god, I just found out you want to commit suicide. I want to see what happens next.
And
so
every other question too. Sometimes he's like, "What do you do here? What? What do you do here? What do I do here?
Yeah.
Oh, I do this. You know, like."
So that was my least favorite scene.
I don't think I have a least favorite scene. Right before he goes up to the cement post and he's sitting in the rubble, and the truck was like starting to unload all the dirt and stuff. And it seemed like he was trying to sit there to get buried. I just found him at that point a bit of a drama queen. It's not that I didn't necessarily like the scene, but I feel like this guy just wants a lot of attention. Like, it doesn't feel like he really wants to go through and kill himself. And maybe, obviously, I don't think he really does. Maybe he just feels like he's ran out of options, you know? And like, this is my last resort. I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
So I felt like, you know, that whole bit with the cement workers, and when he was the Afghan guy comes over and he's like, you know, like, get up from here, you can't stay here. I wouldn't say it's my least favorite scene. I just think our character himself felt a bit over dramatic, a bit melodramatic, you know. And then I like how the Afghan guy responds to him, where like he's not really moving. And he's like, should I bring you over some tea? Like, sarcastically.
Yeah, he's like, are you sick? Are you like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Are you sick? Like, should I bring you over some tea? You know, I kind of like that interaction. But yeah, I just felt like he was I felt like he's a bit of a drama queen, you know.
I just imagine like Alex working on that construction site being like, do it, you coward. Chicken.
I gotta get back to work.
Yalla, nigga, hurry up. You want me to bring you the tea?
Do you have one, Farhan? Least favorite scene?
Yeah, it's actually right before Alex's. When he's sitting there and he's watching the dirt getting poured. I was like, this is too much. Like it was like a couple seconds of it. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. And then we're still watching it. It's like, shot of the dirt pouring, shot of this guy sitting there, shot of the dirt pouring, shot of this guy. I'm like, all right. Then at that point, I had that same reaction that Alex had about the guy. I had that reaction to Kiarostami, where I'm like, bedroom dige, like, yalla, hurry up, let's next shot, move on with the scene.
It's funny that all of our favorite scenes are the same scene, and all our least favorite scene was around the same block.
Yeah, that like chunk in the middle, I think, it slows down too much.
Yeah. Damn, That's Poetry, where we discuss our favorite quotes from the film.
When he's in the car with the old man, with Mr. Bagheri, and he goes, turn right here. And he responds, I don't know the way. And Mr. Bagheri says, but I do. This way is longer, but it's more beautiful.
لطفاً دست چپ بکشید.
ولی من این راهو اصلا بلد نیستم.
من بلدم. اینجا طولانی تره ولی راحت تره قشنگ تره.
And when he said that, I was like, oh, you got him. He got him. Vice script. I was like, this is so good. Like, I knew exactly where he was going with it. And I was like, yes, he's flipped it. He's the one driving. He's the one in charge. And he's not just talking about in this moment, he's going to guide him on this journey. He's talking about life.
Yeah.
He's like, look, you don't know this way. You're right. You know this quick route that just ends. I'm going to show you the longer way.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show you that it's more beautiful.
Yeah.
And then everything that he says after that, all of it can be summarized right back to this little sentence.
100%.
I know the way. This way is longer, but it's more beautiful. And I love it. And I think that really encapsulates this man's argument.
Yeah.
Just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing. Just really beautiful writing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like goes to double down on this idea that again, you could take both sides of it. Everyone's free to interpret art however they want. But my belief is he doesn't commit suicide. And it's the reasons like this. Like, he's being swayed by this man who knows how to gently take him by the hand and show him an alternative way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Alex, your favorite, favorite quote?
I actually have two, and I think they're right after one after the other. I think we kind of touched on it. it was the quote about, you have to change your thinking.
فکرم عوض شد البته که اون ساعت خوب شد ولی فکرم عوض شد.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I think that the way he laid that out for him, the way he set it up, the way he delivered it was, he had lectured him about, it's not the problem, it's the way you're thinking about the problem. And then he hit him with the analogy of the guy who goes to the doctor and he's like, doctor, anywhere I touch my finger, it hurts. I touch my head with my finger and it hurts. It's like, ow, dad, me get it. Oh, I touch my leg. Oh, my leg hurts. And then the guy's like, well, it's not your leg, it's your finger that's hurting,
Yeah.
آقای دکتر انگشتم هر کجا میذارم درد میکنه سرم میذارم درد میکنه پام میذارم درد میکنه شکمم میذارم درد میکنه دستم میذارم درد میکنه دکتر اینو معاینه کرد گفت آقا انگشتت شکسته وجود شما سالمه آقای محترم شما فکرت مریضه خودت سالمه باشه عوض کن فکرت آقا.
Just to kind of amplify, I thought, like, as with many Iranian proverbs and stories and those little tidbits of wisdom, I just think they're so, one, poetic. Like when you're translating it to Farsi, it sounds so smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You say that to a woman and she might leave with you right there and then and there.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this guy's got a broken finger.
Yeah. But yeah, the way he just laid it out, and then it's so philosophical and so true. Like, on a grand scheme of things, it's like we think that, oh, we're the victim in this situation, or this has happened to me, or woe is me. But really, we just have to change the way we look at the situation, change our perspective. I thought it was so powerful. And I think that's why it was so just critically acclaimed and widely regarded as such a great film. It's like these lessons and these little quotes are so relatable, and still I think it's very topical even almost 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Beautifully put. I have it is the mulberry scene that we talked about quite in depth, but the guy explains a story of, it was in the 60s. He went up to a mulberry tree. He says, and I threw the rope over once, twice, 3 times, and it wouldn't stick. So I climbed the tree myself and I tied the rope on tight. Then I felt something soft under my hand. Mulberries. Deliciously sweet. I ate one. It was succulent. Then a second and third.
تناب حلقر می انداختیم گیر نمی کرد 1 مرتبه انداختم گیر نکرد 2 مرتبه انداختم گیر نکرد 3 آخر خودم رفتم بالا تناب گیر دادم دیدم آقا یه چیزه نرم خورد دستم توت بود چه توتی شیرین بود اولی را خوردم دومی را خوردم سومی را خوردم.
Suddenly I noticed that the sun was rising over the mountaintop. What a sun. What a scenery. What greenery. All of a sudden I heard children herding off to school, and they saw me and asked me to shake the tree, and I did, and the mulberries dropped and they ate it and they were happy.
یه وقت دیدم هوا داره روشن میشه آفتاب زده بالای کوه رفیق چه آفتابی چه منظره چه سبززاری یه وقت دیدم صدای بچه ها میاد بچه ها مدرسه بود آمدن دیدم من توت میخورم گفتن آقا درخت تکون بده ما هم درخت تکون دادم اینا خوردن من که میکردم خوردم بله خوردم.
And I gathered some mulberries and I brought them home, and my wife was still sleeping. She woke up and ate some too. I had gone out to kill myself and I came back with mulberries. A mulberry saved my life.
ما جمع کردیم آمدیم تو خونه خانم ما هنوز از خواب بیدار نشده بود آمدیم یه خورده هم دادیم به اونم خورد اونم کیف کرد رفته بودم خودکشی کنم توت چیدم آوردم اینجا آقا یه توت ما را نجات داد.
Beautiful. Love that.
So beautiful. And again, like you're saying, Alex, like the way it's just said in Farsi, and this guy just kind of like the simple pleasures in life. It's beautiful. It's like such a great scene.
Elite scene.
Favorite performance. We discussed our favorite actor in the film. I mean, I feel like it would come down to 2 possibilities, but I still give it to the old man's fantastic, but I give it to Homayun Ershadi, who plays
Mr. Badi'i.
the main character.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, me too. Badi'i.
Badi'i, ببخشید.
Yeah.
شرمندم. Yeah. I thought his performance was incredible. I thought he was so unsuspecting. I thought there was like, he was we didn't know much about him and what he was going through, but we still had so much empathy for him, or at least I did. I'm like, yo, this guy must be suffering if he's driving around looking for someone to bury his ass. Like he must be really going through it.
Yeah.
But his performance was so multifaceted. I thought he was able to really show a man just in flux, and even when that perspective shift happened, like, you know, his whole energy shifted.
Yeah.
Completely.
Totally.
You know, he did a great job. He did a really good job.
Apparently, the story is Kiarostami kind of ran into him somewhere. The guy, like usual, is not an actor, professional actor. He was an architect.
Oh, wow.
And Kiarostami was like fascinated with like his look, like the look on his face and stuff, and just was, like approached him at a mehmoni or something and asked him if he'd ever considered acting. And it's the kind of stuff that people always dream about. Like, oh, I wish some random guy would show up at a party and just put me in the lead of a film based on my look. But that's apparently how it went down, and I believe that because it's such a Kiarostami thing to just be fascinated with people's look and their face and the energy. Like he really fed off like meeting strangers, talking to them, and feeding off their energy. So
he definitely has this look. It's almost not Iranian, you know. Like he looks almost like a mobster or something.
Right,
you know, he does have like he has a very, very distinct look, and I could see why. And his facial expressions too, like the way he was reacting in his conversation.
Yeah.
You know, when he would be talking, but he wouldn't be looking at you. And then versus when he is looking at you or like looking into the barrel of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
I found his look was very, very different compared to what we've seen on screen in Kiarostami characters.
Farn, is it the same for you? What was your favorite performance?
I think him. It's honestly a 50-50 between him and the guy who played Mr. Bagheri.
Mm-hmm.
I think when Mr. Bagheri first came into the scene, I was like, oh, this guy steals the show. But then the scene where he runs through the museum grounds, looking for him, that really won me over because it was like, oh, he's terrified.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like seeing that the fear of death and like coming to terms with his mortality. The performance there I thought was excellent, and it was the first time that we saw him do something different than the rest of the movie. Yeah, where he's just like driving and like either giving people lectures or like getting upset with people. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that you mentioned that like he doesn't really look Iranian to you, because like to me he's like probably the most Iranian looking main actor Kiarostami has ever had in a movie. But that's also because, like, in all his other movies, his main actors are, like, blue-eyed, green-eyed with brown hair or whatever.
His look is definitely interesting.
He kind of has, like, a ghostly face, eh?
Yeah.
Like, he's got, like, sunken eyes, like, very pronounced cheekbones.
He looks like he's on the brink of death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He looks like a chain smoker.
That too.
For some reason.
That too.
I thought our descriptions of this guy are getting more and more damning. This poor guy's gonna like listen to the podcast. We're
real child molester energy coming on.
This guy he's got kind of an interesting face. He's kind of weird looking. Yeah, he looks kind of skeleton-y. Yeah, he looks like a chain smoker.
Yeah. He's gonna listen to this and be like Pedarman Dharma.
Yeah,
that's it.
He's like, wow.
I had a random question for you, Alex. Speaking of like he doesn't even look Iranian, how often do you get shocked responses to people finding out you're Iranian? Is it a common thing?
It's very common. It becomes a production. It's in itself that I gotta explain.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm not really offended by it because I just assume everybody's ignorant and not everybody's seen a black Iranian, which is we'll change that. But I also do a lot. Like, I'm a black man born in Toronto, you know, so I get that.
Yeah.
I might not look very Iranian. And at the end of the day, I'm a black man first, and then I'm Iranian second because my experience is dictated by that. I do get it a lot, and sometimes I just won't say anything. You know, a lot of times I'll hear people speaking Farsi and I won't say it just so I can eavesdrop,
Nice.
just so I can listen to the conversation, and then I'll decide then later if I want to let them know. You know.
Yeah.
If which is a superpower in itself, because you know I feel like sometimes, especially if I'm in the store and I'm selling rugs, and like, we get a lot of Afghan customers, so I'll know about their purchasing decisions before they even just
that's awesome.
Yeah. It's like an invisibility cloak.
Pretty much, right? Pretty much. Actually, I milk it. I definitely milk it.
Yeah,
I definitely milk it to my advantage.
Nitpicks, hot takes, and what aged poorly.
Ooh.
Anything that you want to pick apart? I could start with something easy.
Hit us.
In the wides, you can often see it's not especially with the old man, you can see that it's clearly like a younger man sitting in the car. When they have the wide shots extended, you just see it's like Abbas Kiarostami sitting in the car with the camera.
Yeah, or sometimes it'll show like it's supposed to be the passenger talking, but you can see that the driver's mouth is the one that's moving.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
a small
Yeah.
nitpick.
I will say, because we didn't mention it earlier, the cinematography in this movie is beautiful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like they look like backdrops, like it's stunning.
It's beautiful. The cinematography in this film is to die for. And I think it's like in the conversations when you're in the car, you know, the frame doesn't change, but the background is constantly just like hypnotic. Like you're so sucked into like what is going on in the background that you sometimes forget that these guys are sitting there having a conversation.
But going back to things we don't like,
I did notice that sometimes they weren't in sync with talking, but I didn't notice that it was Kiarostami in the car sometimes.
the sound, back to the car for nitpicks, the sound of the engine was very inconsistent from shot to shot.
Oh, weird.
And in some scenes it was much more noticeable. And I suspect it's a matter of like they got one scene when they were going up a hill, one scene when they're going down a hill or whatever. So the sound of the engine was totally different. And I guess the like cleanup just wasn't as good. And so you can sometimes hear in a conversation, like the conversation with the second Afghan guy, the engine is like all over the place. And it was very distracting for me.
I noticed that, yeah.
One hot take I have, you mentioned this already, Farm, but I wrote it down, is kind of right. Like, why isn't the film called Taste of Mulberries?
Yeah.
Or just make the anecdote he says about cherries. Because I just feel like he does say that line of like, don't you want to live another day to taste the taste of cherry? But like, why switch that up when you've told such a beautiful, eloquent story about mulberries?
Yeah.
Pick one, cherry or mulberry.
The hot
Which
take
one
is
is it?
maybe change the title.
just
or
pick
change
one.
the story.
The subtitles, I've brought this up before. This isn't really a nitpick of the movie itself.
They're always
but
garbage though.
the subtitles in this movie were garbage. They were actually terrible. They're always bad. In this movie in particular, I think they're like offensively bad.
Yeah.
Because like you said, Alex, it's like our language is one that's rich with poetry and with proverbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's largely as a result of like the reason that Iranians speak Persian and not Arabic is because our native language was allowed because of poetry. Through the use of poetry, the caliphs were like, okay, fine, you can continue to use Persian, but it's only allowed in poetry because we appreciate Persian poetry. And then people just started talking to each other in poetry, and a lot of the proverbs stuck, or the verb conjugation that stuck around were ones that were easily rhymable, and it became part of our culture. So much of that is lost in the subtitles, or sometimes when something is literal, the person writing the subtitles is trying to make it like more fruitful or whatever, and I'm like, this doesn't work. Like, you're really losing the feel. Yeah. I have one nitpick is I feel like there could have been more women in the film. There's like this one woman who's paying for her ticket at the museum, and then there's one woman who gets her photo taken. And I feel like there could have been more. I understand that it feels like a lot of this is commentary on men's mental health. So I can understand why you wanna just like focus on men, but it's like, okay, look, you can still have some other characters in the film who are women, and I don't need them to have a whole like side plot where they go off on some adventure or whatever, but like show that women exist, you know? And then my hot take is I think the first, not just that middle chunk, I think the first half of the movie is actually way too slow. And I think that a lot of Ebert's criticisms with the film, I think, are very valid for the first half of the film. I think that they're ludicrous for the second half of the film for him to make those statements. Because I think that especially that long night, right, where he's contemplating suicide and he's alone and it's terrifying, like that scene has to be drawn out because it's like, it's tension building. It's really scary. It's terrifying because you don't know what he's going to do. And I think he's scared, right? But I think because the first half of the movie is so slow at times and some of the takes are so long, and it is that Kiarostami style of being like, oh, these long takes where like someone's asking 500 questions or someone's just like contemplating or whatever, having it overused really robs the impact of when it's more important, like in the later half of the film. So that's my hot take, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a fair criticism. I would one up you on that and say even not just women. You know, it would have been nice to see a black guy in the film. Not that he has to be in there.
No,
but
you're
I
right.
think that I think he did a great job. I always say Kiarostami in this film did a really great job of showcasing the different ethnicities that make up the fabric of what it means to be Iranian. And so I really appreciated seeing Afghans, seeing a Turk, seeing a Lor, seeing a Kurdish guy. You know, I think that was very conscious, and it shows that, you know, Iranians are not homogenous or a monolith, you know. But at the same time, I think he could have done an inch better, you know. Throw on a Janubi guy in there, you know, with some Ray-Bans or some, you know, that wouldn't have hurt.
Double feature lineup. What would make a great double feature with this movie?
Kava, you go first.
There's a film by Ramin Bahrani called Goodbye Solo. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it.
I've never seen that one.
I've seen it a very long time ago. It's about a Senegalese cab driver named Solo who picks up an old man, and he befriends this old man he's a taxi driver, so he's driving him to his destination. And this is like old man is enigmatic and despondent and not really, you know, whatever. His name is William, and he's on a downward spiral towards suicide. So the cab driver is discussing with him the destination and where he's going. And once he starts realizing that this guy plans on killing himself when he gets to his destination, the Senegalese cab driver is trying to talk him out of it and talk about the meaning of life and stuff. And I first wrote this down as a possibility. And then once I, like, out of curiosity, I went to the Goodbye Solo IMDb, and it said that Ramin Bahrani was hugely inspired by writing this movie by Taste of Cherry. So it was like directly supposed to be his, like, oh, this is my Taste of Cherry movie. You know, two people in a car and suicide.
I met him last summer. He's just a very interesting guy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's super
Smart
cool.
guy. Really
Super
intelligent,
smart,
dude.
Very intelligent. That's interesting. I never seen that one. I might have to watch that one next.
Goodbye Solo. Yeah, and it would make a friggin' harsh drag of a double feature, like 2 nights in a theater about movies about suicide. But I think in terms of like matching subject matter and tonal corollary, like they're very, like, their souls are very similarly aligned. So that's my pick. Goodbye Solo.
Goodbye Solo. Okay, not bad. What's your pick, Farhan?
A movie called 50-50. Have you guys seen it?
Oh, I know that movie. Yeah, that's the one about the guy who gets cancer.
He's diagnosed with cancer. Yeah, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Seth Rogen. Especially because of the themes that we were talking about with, like, men just needing to talk. That whole movie, he's, like, not really opening up about the situation that he's in. And he goes through a lot of messed up stuff, right? Like with the diagnosis, with the treatment, a breakup with his girlfriend, all this stuff. He doesn't open up until, like, near the end of the movie. And when he does, there's just this, like, it's so cathartic, his release. Like, when he just lets it all out, it's so cathartic. And I think that I would want to watch this first and then 50-50, I think. Because also it's funny too. Like, it's definitely a dramedy. And I think that might help bring a bit of levity to the audience after this film.
Yeah, that's a good call.
I'm gonna change gears. I'm gonna go with Night on Earth by Jim Jarmusch.
Oh, yeah. Great movie.
Yeah,
I don't know. What's it about?
that. It's like a bunch of short films and it's about it's basically just cab drivers driving people around, and then they're having conversations in the cab. I don't remember how many different stories it is. Is it 6 or 7? Maybe.
I think it's...
I want to say 6. But yeah, it's just like the concept of, like, around the world, like a cab driver and a passenger. And each conversation is different, but that's very similar to his film Coffee and Cigarettes.
Yeah, which is also great.
Which is also great, yeah. But I would pair Night on Earth with Taste of Cherry. Just, it's got the same dynamic with the travel, the journey. I think that's a Kiarostami thing. And maybe, you know, Jim Jarmusch came, he's around the same time as this. So yeah, I was gonna say maybe he was loosely inspired. I don't know, but I think it fits well together.
Night on Earth was 91.
91? Okay, so Taste of Cherry is after this.
But it's interesting that if you had considered the original title of Taste of Cherry being Journey to Dawn, you would have a film of Night on Earth and Journey to Dawn.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Can this be made into a modern Hollywood remake? How would you do it if it was possible? I will say no. I most often say yes, but I just feel like a film like this, doesn't really work. Like the good closest version would be something like Goodbye Solo, maybe. But here's a little thing to spit at you guys to spin you into a. I don't know what I'm trying to say. What if there was a theatrical production of this on stage? I think that could be really interesting and work.
Yeah.
If you had like Fringe Festival, it's so dialogue heavy, and you'd almost have like a car as a set, and then you could use like shadows to like whatever. But it'd be interesting to see a Taste of Cherry, the not Broadway musical, but like a small theatrical production.
Yeah,
it could be interesting.
I think you could do it. You'd have to do something about the backdrop. You know, I think the whole car would be set in the vehicle.
Project it on the background.
Have something just rolling constantly, so driving. Yeah, I think you do it. I think you do. I think you could do a modern Hollywood remake.
Yeah, how would you do it if you were in charge?
If I was in charge, I think it would be I'd probably go with a black Iranian guy trying to commit suicide. I would stick him in a metropolis. You know, I think like having this same concept in like imagine in a Toronto.
Yeah,
someone's trying to drive around downtown Toronto trying to find someone to bury them, or like maybe it's not bury them, maybe maybe the means is different. It's not by burial, but the idea of searching for help in a place like the Screwface Capital, I think would be a really cool concept to explore. And then also, you know, the bright lights of downtown Toronto. You know, I think that'd be a really cool thing to put on the screen.
Yeah,
it would be similar to Night on Earth, or like even like a Collateral, or like, you know, but not the Collateral, not the action, but I meant just like the aesthetic.
Yeah. You should see Goodbye Solo. I mean,
I'm gonna watch it.
It feels like you're describing it quite, you know, the black taxi driver. I mean, he's not the suicidal one in the story. He's the other man is, but it's like,
I love that Bahrani went for that. Like, I think that's I think it's really beautiful to pay homage to, you know, our forefathers in this game. You know, so I like that. Yeah,
I think it's possible that you could do it, like have a Hollywood remake. I don't think you should, but I think it's
just
possible.
Just because you could doesn't mean you should. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I think what I would like is a recut version of the film where like the first half of the movie is a little punchier, but I wouldn't want to remake the movie. No.
The first
give me a special edition. Give me a special edition with like Boba Fett walking around in the background and like Mr. Badi walks on Jabba the Hutt's tail. That's what I want.
Final thoughts and grades.
I give Taste of Cherry an A+.
Solid.
I think it's essential. Iranian. I think if anybody wants a nice entry point into what you know, our culture has to offer on screen, on the silver screen, I think Taste of Cherry is a great entry point.
It's the first Iranian film I ever saw.
Oh, is it really?
I saw it in like 99 or 2000. It's the first film I'd ever seen.
And it obviously made you a fan because you're still watching them.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a great point of entry. I like philosophical films. I like art house films. Maybe I'm biased for them, but I just think it stands the test of time. And I think even 100 years from now, it'll still be so relevant. Yeah, it's beautifully shot. The dialogue is incredible. It's got a little bit of mystery. It's got some allure to it, and on the sense of that, you know, you don't really know what this guy's deal is. It's just a beautiful, beautiful film, and so philosophical. And I think everybody should watch this film, whether you're Iranian or not.
Yeah, I think that it's an excellent movie. I think the second half of the movie especially redeemed the first half of the movie for me. I thought the ending was interesting. Like, it could have actually even just ended with the nighttime, like with the sunrise, and I would have even been fine with that. But the ending we got was kind of interesting, and I can see why it's on all these lists of like must-watch Iranian films. Overall, I think I would need to see it again, but I'm gonna give it an A-, which I was expecting it to be a lot higher, to be honest, because of how much people have talked about it. And things like the performances were all great. The dialogue in the film was excellent. Again, that second half of the movie, I can't stress enough how beautiful it is. But because of some of the issues that I had with that first half, it really brings the score down for me.
I absolutely love the first half. I think the first half's more interesting than the second half, to be honest. It's so weird.
I like the first half. I don't have any problems with the first half.
Yeah. I give this an A, a 90 out of 100. For all the reasons that we talked about. I think it's a beautiful film. I think it's a very dialogue heavy film, which is good. I just like in my films to also have like a wide range of characters and all this stuff. And I feel like this is more like a philosophical text more than a piece of cinema. It's a beautiful piece of cinema, but it's also more like poetic. And it's a film you have to feel more than you need to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You should watch it, but you have to like let the film happen to you.
You have to listen.
You have to really listen. So I give it an A, which you want to do. What is our average score then for that is what?
It makes it an A-.
Yeah.
It's just under an A.
The first Iranian film to win the Palme d'Or offers no backstory for our lead, no character arc, no 3-act structure, and arguably no conclusion. And yet it is internationally considered one of Kiarostami's most acclaimed and celebrated films. We know nothing about our lead other than he wants to commit suicide and wants to be buried, and yet it is widely recognized as a deeply personal and incredibly absorbing film. Does this speak to its place in the milieu of cinema history, or is there perhaps something odd in the larger statement it makes, as it bemuses deeply resonating themes on the meaning of life, the power of choice, and the freedom of will? Conflict in this film only stems from the moral viewpoints each character holds and believes. And in doing so, this film exudes some of the shepherding warmth one might receive from a few pages of a philosophy book or advice from an old friend, and therefore resonates more like a visual poem, adorned with spoken word and sage advice. Once again, Kiarostami challenges what it means to see a film, make a film, write a character, and depending on whether you were bored to death or moved to tears, it's impossible to say this film doesn't stand out from the pantheon of international cinema. Alex, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alex.
خیلی ممنون داداش. خیلی خوشحال شدم.
Couldn't have done it without you, and thank you for recommending this film.
Appreciate you.
Farhan, you know how I feel about you.
Thank you, Kaveh.
To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be omid didar.
Bye.
Peace.
Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.